Hi, welcome to my channel. This is Literature with Ella, and we're here to talk about books. This is going to be a little January wrap-up, so let's just get right to it. So first, I read two books in the Louise Penny Chief Inspector Gamache series. I read The Long Way Home and The Nature of the Beast, and I've read all of the novels in this series up to this point, and I think that these two will probably be my last. I've really enjoyed this series. If you don't know, it's about Chief Inspector Gamache, who's a detective with the Sûreté de Quebec, and he solves generally murders in and around Quebec and the countryside. Chiefly, he has been drawn out to a little town in the countryside called Three Pines, where just an inordinate amount of murders are happening based on the population size. And these are, I don't think they're technically cozy because there is quite graphic violence depicted in it, but because it's in a small town and there's like a bistro where people go and have like delicious meals, and there's beautiful art described and the landscape and gardens and all that stuff, it has like a cozy vibe, even though they're brutal murders and all sorts of violence that's depicted on the page. I've enjoyed these as kind of like an escapist, kind of fun story. I think they're fairly well written. Gamache is a fairly interesting character. I think he has a sidekick called Beauvoir, who is a bit of a wet blanket. He's described as being like very attractive but vain, and kind of, he doesn't like bad weather, especially if there's mud, because he likes to wear his Italian leather shoes. A lot of these are kind of just classic mysteries, classic murder mysteries, police procedurals, with that kind of cozy vibe. In general, in a lot of the books, there are kind of like two plots. One is the main, murder mystery, figuring that out. And then there's another maybe like subplot about like corruption in the police force in the Sûreté de Quebec. And I found that those corruption storylines really push the bounds of believability, because often the bad guys in those storylines are just like pure evil. They're just like, they want destruction for destruction's sake. They want, power for power. They're willing to, kill all of these innocent people for not very good reasons. But those storylines have been few and far between earlier in the series, but I feel like now they're starting to dominate, and it just gets a little too cray cray for my personal tastes. Like, I just don't. I'm like, really? I definitely recommend the first maybe like 10 books in the series. I think anything that's kind of been published after 2016, I haven't gotten to the end of what's been published so far, and I just think I'm going to let those pass me by. I'm going to enjoy what's come before and what was good about them, and the rest I'll leave to other people. So the next thing I read in January was a doozy, because it was very long and it took up a lot of time, and that was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Now, I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, loved it. Love that. When it won the Women's Prize, that was the one and only time a book that I actually loved won a prize. I don't know about you, but I always have this experience. Like, I love a book and I see it's nominated and I'm like, and then it never wins. This is the one time it won. It's kind of like the only time I've ever agreed with a book prize. And I loved it. It was magical and kind of awe-inspiring. I loved the mystery and I loved the main characters. I had tried to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell one time before, several years ago, but it was during the COVID when that first dropped. And, I thought, when I take my long walks to get myself out of the house, I'll listen to this story. And I just could not get into it. But this time I tried it again, and this time I really got into it, and I enjoyed it for the most part. There were certain times when it really dragged. I should tell you what this one is about. Let's go back. Okay, we're in England. It's during the Napoleonic Wars. England has a history of having magic, but at this point, magic was gone. The people who used to perform magic, they all died. That art seems to be lost. And all that remains are magical historians. So it's at the Magical Historian Foundation in York. They encounter a man, Mr. Norrell, who is in fact a practicing magician who can do magic. And he has this giant library that a few of the members go and see. And then Mr. Norrell says, okay, I will perform magic for you if you all agree to no longer call yourselves magicians and give up your study of magic, because Mr. Norrell really wants to keep magic for himself. These men agree because they just don't believe he can do it, but then he proves them wrong, and then word spreads. And Mr. Norrell goes to London. He has this idea that magic can help England beat Napoleon. And so he tries to get attention in Parliament. And then while that's kind of going on, Jonathan Strange, he's an heir of an estate. So he's wealthy, but he really has no direction in life. He kind of has a chance encounter with a strange man who gives him a slip of paper with a spell written on it, and he's able to do magic from that. And so he goes around trying to learn more about magic. But the thing is that Mr. Norrell has bought up all the books on magic, so Jonathan is having a real hard time learning anything. So he eventually ends up in Mr. Norrell's orbit, and Mr. Norrell, after seeing Jonathan perform some magic, decides that he's going to tutor him and becomes his magical teacher. A friendship and relationship develops between them, but Mr. Norrell is so used to wanting to keep magic for himself and keeping secrets around magic because he's worried about magic getting into the wrong hand. So after a while, Jonathan Strange becomes frustrated with him because he's not sharing magic with him. And he knows that Mr. Norrell is keeping things from him in line. And so he kind of, ends their friendship, and he goes off to fight with the British against Napoleon. And so that's like the main plot line, but there's this subplot line of earlier Mr. Norrell, when he's trying to get attention from the government, he tries to save a young woman's life. Well, okay, so this woman has died, and she is the soon-to-be betrothed of somebody in government. And Mr. Norrell is like, if I bring her back to life and save her, then I'm going to get Parliament's attention. But in order to do this, he has to make an agreement with a fairy. And we all know how agreements with fairies go. Not very well. This poor woman, she is brought back to life, but now she's essentially cursed to have to go to fairyland every night and like dance in a ball. And she's also cursed that she cannot tell anybody about this. And so there becomes a battle between Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, and the fairy that brought her back. And so he's kind of like the antagonist in all of this. And this eventually comes to blows, and it takes 800 pages. Now, Susanna Clarke is such a good writer, and for a lot of it, you're on your seat, and it's such a detailed, rich world. You want to spend time in it. But I did feel like, the bits with Jonathan Strange doing the fighting against Napoleon, although that was given so much time in the narrative, the real plot was that subplot with the evil fairy guy who has, ensnared that poor woman. Like, that's really, I felt like where the heart was. Like, you really feel for this woman. Her life is terrible, and she can't tell anybody about it because of the fairy's like powers. So that was where the energy was for me. And this bit with Napoleon was kind of like, it was cool. The magic Jonathan Strange does is imaginative, but the real heat was elsewhere. And that was really my main complaint. I really love spending time in this world. Susanna, her descriptions and how imaginative she is, like all of that stuff that I love that was part of Piranesi is definitely in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's just kind of more unwieldy. And I felt like, oh gosh, it could have used a really good edit. And I think when it was first published, there were plans for there to be sequels. Like if you go on Goodreads right now, they say it's number one in the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell series. But Susanna Clarke has come out and said that she has no plans for sequels. In the first book, she made the world so complicated that continuing it is just not feasible, which I felt was very honest. But also, I think that is exactly what happened with Patrick Rothfuss. Like, I don't know about you. I loved Name of the Wind. The second one, I think, was Wiseman's Fear. Love that one too. Not as much as Name of the Wind, but I thought it was still really good. And I'm like, I'm so ready for that third book. And I don't think it's coming ever. And I think it's because Mr. Rothfuss made the world too complicated. Like, there are so many mysteries. Like, if you try to, he's made a big knot and he does not know how to untangle it, and that's why we haven't gotten the third book. And I don't think we're going to get the third book. All right. So the next book I read in January was Death at the Sign of the Rook by Kate Atkinson. And this is the newest book in the Jackson Brodie detective series. This is a sidebar, but this takes place in England. The writer is English and the setting is in England. But Jackson Brodie sounds like such an American name to me. Like, it sounds like a guy from Texas, right? So this is the latest one in that series. Now, I've enjoyed some of the books in this series. Now, Kate Atkinson, these are more like literary mysteries. They do have great characterization, and the prose is definitely well developed. But I think what really makes them literary is that they're structured very differently. Like, you generally start with Jackson and the crime is committed, but then you jump to another character's point of view and you don't know how that character is connected with the crime, but you spend some time with them. And then you jump to another character. And again, you don't know how this character is connected to the crime, but you get to know that character. And then you just jump to another one. And then you keep on jumping around from chapter to chapter to all of these, sometimes 3, 4, 5 different characters, but you don't know how it's all going to come together until the end. You're following all these characters and you don't know why, like the whole time you're reading this book. And so you have to be really patient. You have to stick with it. And sometimes that gets really frustrating because you're just like, why do I care about this person? I'm learning this person's whole life story, and I have no idea how this person matters in this story. And usually by the time you get to the end, there's a big payoff, but other times not so much. And I think this time I was really I was struggling. And then when I got to the end, I realized something that I haven't realized before in this series is that Jackson Brodie, our intrepid detective, is not very good at being a detective. Like, usually it is other characters that finds out what happens, or like he finds out just because of sheer dumb luck. And this one, I should tell you what this one was about. Here I go again. So Jackson Brodie is a private detective. These two people, brother and sister, come to him and say, hey, our mother has recently died, and when we were going through her house, we realized that this painting that we believe is a Renaissance painting, like kind of very valuable painting, is missing. And we think this, home health nurse cleaner lady who our mother had hired to look after her in her final days, we think she stole it. And then it turns out that another, very famous, valuable artwork was stolen from the town's manor house. This novel, the way it was kind of advertised, was more of like an Agatha Christie vibe, a locked room mystery, because during the novel there's a big snowstorm and everybody gets stuck in the manor. And like the first chapter does like a flash forward, and then we jump back in time, and in that flash forward, like, we're all at this manor house. It's one of like those fake murder mystery like game nights. Like some actors put on like a little murder mystery thing, and the people there at the dinner try to figure out like who did it. And so I was expecting that was what the book was going to be about. We're going to have all these characters up in this manor house. There's a big snowstorm. They're stuck there. They're playing at this murder mystery, and then an actual murder occurs. But that's not what this book was about. That's not how, like, we get that flash forward scene and then we go back in time, and we don't get back to the manor with the snowstorm until the end. If you're thinking you're going to get some Agatha Christie vibes, you're not going to get them. So yeah, I was disappointed in this one. I really thought that it was going to hit. Too bad it didn't. Okay, so next I read Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. This one I think was shortlisted or longlisted for the Booker in 2024. I did a standalone review on this one, so if you want to check that one out, I'm going to link it in the description. I'm going to remember to tell you guys what the book is about before I start talking about it this time. Okay. Thomas Hart and Grace Macaulay have lived all their lives in the small Essex town of Audley. Though separated in age by 3 decades, the pair are kindred spirits, torn between their commitment to religion and their desire to explore the world beyond their small Baptist community. It is 2 romantic relationships that will rend their friendship, and in the wake of this rupture, Thomas develops an obsession with a vanished 19th century 19th 19th century astronomer said to haunt a nearby manor. And Grace flees oddly entirely for London. Over the course of 20 years, by coincidence and design, Thomas and Grace will find their lives brought back into orbit as the mystery of the vanished astronomer unfolds in a devastating tale of love and scientific pursuit. What can I say about this? I loved it. Sarah Perry just writes so beautifully. Her descriptions of the landscape are so poetic, and her descriptions of people are just like truly fantastic. She really makes characters come alive in just a few pages. So this is her introducing the character of Grace Macaulay. Grace Macaulay then, 17, small and plump, with skin that went brown by the end of May. Her hair was black and oily and had the hot, consoling scent of an animal in summer. She disliked books and was by nature a thief if she found a thing to be beautiful, but not hers. She didn't know she couldn't sing. She was inclined to be cross. She had the sudden, worldless affection of a farmyard animal and a habit of butting her small body like a lamb against Thomas, who loved and resented her as he imagined a father would love and resent a daughter. Like, she just writes so beautifully. This is not a perfect book. I have some small quibbles with it, but all in all, I really loved the journey that Sarah Perry takes you on. There's descriptions of astronomy and principles and theories and things in here. And the way they're described are just really understandable. Like, she's able to take this really complicated thing and describe it in a way that I really understood for a moment. I don't know, could I tell you about them right now? Did they stick in my brain? Probably not. But in that moment, I was like, I get it. And it is kind of awe-inspiring. Like, you know that Sarah really is into this stuff and it comes across. And this really is a story of friendship. After reading Enlightenment, I was looking at my bookshelf and I realized I've had Melmoth, also by Sarah Perry, on my shelf for years and I've never read it. And I so loved my experience with Enlightenment. I was like, let's just dive right into this. And so I did. All right, so what is this one about? I'll do a little flap copy for you. It has been years since Helen Franklin left England. In Prague, working as a translator, she has found a home of sorts, or at least unpronounced sanctuary. That changes when her friend Carol discovers a mysterious letter in the library, a strange confession and a curious warning that speaks of Melmoth, the witness, a dark legend found in obscure fairy tales and antique village lore. As such superstition has it, Melmoth hunts her prey through the ages, dooming those she captures to the damnation of timeless, itinerant solitude. To Helen, it all seems the stuff of unenlightened fantasy. But, unaware, as Helen wanders the cobblestone streets, she is being watched, and then Carol disappears. I think I read in an article that after Essex Serpent came out, and when she was writing this one, I think maybe COVID happened, or maybe she was diagnosed with chronic illness, and that's what accounted for the darkness in this one. Because compared to Essex Serpent, characters are angry in here. They are not forgiving. Of all of her, the 3 of her books that I've read, this is by far my favorite, because I guess I like it dark. This is definitely, it has gothic vibes. There are a lot of corvids, perching on street posts and looking in your window, and lots of things following you in the night, and something just out of the corner of your eye, like very, very spooky. It's not like scary like a horror would be. Definitely spooky and very disconcerting. That's kind of the vibe. And again, all of Sarah's beautiful language, she just writes so well. Let me find a good one. Helen is poised between a dark sea and a certain shore. Carl has never, in the years she's known him, shown fear of any kind, nor any inclination towards superstition, or to be given credence to legend. The change that has come over him is nothing less than the change from mortality to immortality. It all at once occurs to her as it never has before, that he'll die, that death already has its imprint on him, on the day he's not yet lived, like a watermark on empty sheets of paper. I gobbled this up in just a few days. I just can't recommend this one enough. It's so funny, like, you know, when you don't like a book, you have so many things to say about, but sometimes when you like a book, you're like, this is just it. This is what a book should be. This is just my vibe. And my dog is about to bark at the mailman. He barks at the mailman every day. He's met the mailman. Like when he's outside, the mailman will come to the gate and give him a treat. And he's all like whiny and happy. And he knows the mailman is not dangerous. And yet when he's inside, the mailman is a menace. Theo, come here. Come. Come here. Up. Yes, come here. The people want to see how cute you are. Come meet the people. This is the dog who's afraid of the mailman. Show the people your beautiful brown eyes. Yeah, this is our mop. Hello, Theo. Our little mop. He's mostly a very good boy. All right, so that was it. Those are the books I read in January. Thank you for stopping by. Like and subscribe.